Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. We do educational material on this channel, and today is no exception. Today is video number 304 that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Mr. Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson lived from 1898 until 1990, and for about the last 60 of those years was dedicated toward working out his reciprocal system. He first wrote up his two fundamental postulates back in the late 1950s. And from there, he deduced a theoretical universe. And then from there, he wrote books on many different topics, including chemistry and astronomy and physics, but also economics, and a book on metaphysics. I went through his book on metaphysics earlier in these videos. That book is called Beyond Space and Time, and we read through that whole book. And we also read through almost the whole of his book called Nothing But Motion. So you can go back in the archives and listen to those as we go through, or as I went through. Now, when Larson died back in 1990, he left behind a lot of books, and he also left behind some followers, a dedicated following, not very big, but you know, a few pretty heavy hitters, including this guy KVK Nehru. Dr. Nehru wrote probably about 50 articles, and many of them are pretty technical, but there are also some articles that are relatively introductory and overviews of the whole thing. And we're looking at least one of those articles today that is called the space-time. Oh, no. This one is called Eternal Ceaseless Motion. That's basically what Larson has gotten into with his reciprocal system. The basic idea is that we live in a universe that is made of motion. And it's not made out of matter, it's not made out of energy, it's made out of motion. Matter and energy are just two different varieties of motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. So motion is a fraction or a ratio with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator. Space and time don't really have an independent existence. They exist only together in motion. And they exhibit a reciprocal relationship. Now, just remember, when you're dealing with reciprocals, you're dealing with multiplication. In the legacy science, this is really an additive system. Measurements are made from zero, and you go plus or minus. 0, and then on the plus side, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the minus side, you have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. But with the reciprocal system, you're talking about multiplication. So the 0 point is basically 1. You start from 1, and on the plus side you have 2, 3, 4, and 5. And on the minus side you have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. So instead of adding up to 0, the numbers actually multiply to 1. That's where the balance is, from 1 and not from 0. Now this becomes maybe a little bit more evident if you look at the third prong of Larson's first postulate. He says that space and time are quantized. That means that they come only in chunks. There's no continuity there. You know, you either have a full chunk or you have nothing. And so you have, you know, with space, you have either a full chunk of space or you don't have space at all. And then you either have two chunks or you don't have any. And if you have exactly one chunk of space in one chunk of time, now just remember that space over time is motion. And in particular, space over time is speed, such as the car is moving 15 miles per hour. 15 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time. Now, all of the other scientific quantities are also fractions in the same way. So, acceleration is space over time to the second power. Force is time over space to the second power. Gravity is space to the third power over time to the third power, whereas matter is time to the third power over space to the third power. And, you know, all the electromagnetic properties as well. Current is really just S over T. And charge is really T over S. And capacitance is T to the third power over S. I mean, S to the third power over T. And so on and so forth. So that is a very powerful check on the reciprocal system and on the legacy system. You can balance your equations out, and you don't have to use the MKS system, which is way more cumbersome, because not only does it have time and space, but it also has matter, meter, kilogram, seconds. And so it's much more difficult to do a check with that system than with Larson's very easy space and time units system. But if you have exactly 1 unit of time and 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have what Larson calls unit speed, which is otherwise known as the speed of light. So the speed of light is 1 over 1 equals 1, unit speed. And for Larson, the speed of light is basically the background, or the ether, or the origin, or the midpoint, or the null point, or the 0 point of the state of rest of this universe. Whereas in legacy science, that is 0. 0 is the origin in legacy science, but in the reciprocal system, it is 1, the speed of light. This basically means that in Larson's system, half the universe is moving faster than the speed of light, which is anathema to the legacy system, where Einstein said that nothing moves faster than the speed of light. Everything is moving slower than the speed of light. That means that the legacy scientists have only discovered one of the 2 sectors of Larson's universe. For Larson, he has the material sector. That is the half of the universe that's moving slower than the speed of light. And he has the cosmic sector, which is moving faster than the speed of light. And both of those sectors are reciprocals of each other. So even if you don't really know what's going on in the cosmic sector, you can determine it by inverting the roles of space and time. Now, we didn't go over the two first prongs of Larson's first postulate. One is that space and time are both three-dimensional. He calls that coordinate time and coordinate space. And then the second is that space and time are both progressing in a scalar manner. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude but no direction. Larson refers to this as clock time and clock space. And you can see this in the clock. The clock is moving. It's always getting later and later and later. But it's not moving in any particular direction. And same with space. Space is also progressing in a scalar manner. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, which you could envision using a balloon with dots on it. You blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. And you can also see that in the Hubble telescope's observation that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. The reason why we don't recognize this here in our material sector, in our slower than the speed of light sector, is that this progression of space is overwhelmed. It might not be quite the right word. It is balanced out, or it is neutralized by gravitation, and so we don't notice the progression of space because we're in a gravitationally bound system. Whereas if we were in the cosmic sector, we would notice the progression of space, but we wouldn't notice the progression of time, because in the cosmic sector, we have what we would call inverse gravity. And so the gravity is in time and not in space. And so the progression of time is nullified. That's the word I was looking for. The progression of time is nullified in the cosmic sector, but you can still see the progression of space like a clock. So that's kind of what I was getting at. In the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and you have a clock time. Time is progressing and getting later and later and later. But if you cross that boundary, that unit speed boundary, and you move to the material, to the cosmic sector, then you have coordinate time, 3 dimensions of time, and you have clock space. Space is getting farther and farther and farther apart. And then there are 2 other boundaries, one within each one of the sectors, that are what Larson calls the unit time and unit space boundaries. And these, again, come from the fact that the reciprocal system is quantized. Space and time and motion are quantized, meaning that there is a minimum unit of space. If you don't have a full unit of space, then you don't have space. And if you don't have space, then that means that you only have time, because it's got to be one or the other or both. And so basically, within 1 unit of space, you have what Larson calls the time region. And again, the rules are inverted. When you move across that boundary and into the time region, then you move into a new set of rules, and you really move back into a more of a 3-dimensional time reference system. Same thing in the cosmic sector, but with time instead of space. And so if you don't have a full unit of time, then you only have space. Larson refers to this as the space region. And, you know, the time region and the space region are both for, you know, microscopic, whatever the time equivalent of microscopic, instantaneous phenomena, atoms and molecules. So the time region in the material sector is where, you know, all atomic phenomena, quantum phenomena, molecular phenomena occur. And in the cosmic sector, the space region is where inverse matter, inverse atoms, and inverse molecules are, you know, interacting. Okay, now let's look at Nehru here. We're in toward the end of this paper, and he's about to start talking about space and time being quantized. I think this section I've read a few of these paragraphs, but I think I'm going to go back to where are space and time quantized, since we've been talking about that for a while here. Are space and time quantized? The fact that the universal motion can neither slacken nor increase its speed implies that speed is quantized, and all that is possible is unit speed. Once the unit speed exists as uniform outward progression, it becomes possible to superimpose on it an inward progression. The reciprocal system shows gravitation is nothing but such inward progression. However, this inward progression could be either inward in space or inward in time. Gravitation in time results from the downward differentiation of the primary motion, which produces matter as we know it. On the other hand, the upward differentiation of the primary motion produces gravitation in time, or the inverse gravitation arising from the matter of the inverse sector, namely the inverse matter. We do not normally encounter the particles of inverse matter for the simple reason that they form aggregates in three-dimensional time and not in three-dimensional space. They are widely and randomly distributed in our familiar three-dimensional spatial frame. Now the reason why space and time appear so different to our observation should be apparent. In the local environment, the inward motion of gravitation counterbalances the outward progression of space, and we see a stationary space. The concomitant outward progression of time, however, is unchecked, and we observe it as a scalar progression. Scalar because whatever number of dimensions time has, there is no geometric relationship between them and the dimensions of space. In the inverse sector, gravitation acts inward in time and counterbalances the primary outward progression of time, giving a stationary temporal frame. Radiation, since it moves at unit speed, is at the boundary of the two sectors and is visible from either sector, in whichever sector it originates. Therefore, the radiation from the stars and from the stars of the inverse sector should show up as radiation of high inverse temperature, that is, low temperature, and with absolutely isotropic spatial distribution. This is exactly what we observe in the cosmic microwave background. In fact, by the reciprocal system of theory, we can even arrive at the precise value of the temperature of the background radiation, which I believe is 2.7 degrees Kelvin. And I believe Nehru has a paper where he goes through the steps of how to determine that. Conventional theories, since they assume that this radiation was emitted by the stars of our sector, have a pretty difficult task of reconciling its absolute isotropy with the patent non-uniform distribution of stellar aggregates in space. Another implication of the existence of unit speed is that it has to be the ratio of a unit of space to a unit of time. Thus, the reciprocal system points out that both space and time are quantized. We may recall that at the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, Max Planck had come up with a similar astonishing discovery that energy is quantized and set the pace for the subsequent revolutions in the development of science. The primary progression is always outward from unity. In the familiar three-dimensional spatial frame, away from unity is in the same direction as away from zero. But inside the unit of space, in the time region, away from unity is toward zero. Therefore, the primary motion appears as a perpetual inward motion in this region. Since gravitation, as mentioned earlier, always exists in opposition to the primary background motion, it manifests as an outward motion, that is, as repulsion in the region inside the quantum of space. And again, he quotes from The Secret Doctrine, "The occultists are not alone in rejecting the gravity of modern science, and in accepting instead attraction and repulsion. They see, moreover, in these two opposite forces only the two aspects of the universal unit. And there are forces coexistent with gravitation of which they, the scientists, know nothing, besides that other fact that there is no gravitation properly speaking, only attraction and repulsion. By this insight, the reciprocal system explains all types of bonds, being cohesion, in solids, and calculates accurately the interatomic distances of all the substances. Imagine two atoms moving toward each other. They cannot approach to a distance less than a quantum of space, because that is the smallest space that can exist. However, by virtue of the inverse relation between space and time, the two particles can move outward in time, which is equivalent to inward in space, until a force equilibrium is established. Or really a motion equilibrium. Force is a kind of motion. It is this changeover from motion in space to motion in time that happens inside the quantum of space, which gives rise to the strange phenomena of the quantum domain, like non-locality, tunneling, lack of definite trajectory, wave-particle duality, to mention a few. And Nehru has a long paper on all those different qualities of quantum phenomena. This section is called Matter of Life. Further, we note that in the physical universe, left to them, all structures move spontaneously from states of greater organization or order to states of lesser organization. In other words, the available energy goes on decreasing. But in the case of biological units, like the living cells or higher life, the organization level is either maintained or increases against all odds. It is still an enigma how life is possible at all in the material universe, if we stick to purely mechanistic explanations. The reciprocal system shows that while available energy goes on decreasing in our sector, the inverse is true in the inverse sector, namely the available inverse energy decreases spontaneously. This is tantamount to increase in available energy from our point of view. Therefore, we discover that what we call a living cell comes into being when the purely material structural unit is connected to and governed by a control unit. And control is basically kind of the opposite of chaos. Just like in the great sitcom Get Smart. Governed by a control unit built of the structures of the inverse sector. This control unit, of course, appears non-local. The Mahatma Blavatsky asserts, life as life is transformable into other aspects or phases of the all-pervading force. Spirit, life, and matter are not natural principles existing independently of each other, but the effects of combinations produced by eternal motion in space. Try and examine life apart from organism, and what remains of it? Simply a mode of motion. Summarizing, we can say that the present view is that the phenomena of the physical universe exist in a framework of space and time. In contrast, the new paradigm asserts that scalar motion or speed, i.e. space-time, is the content of the physical universe, the sole content. Then we discover that there are several speed domains of the physical universe which cannot legitimately be represented in the conventional three-dimensional spatial reference frame. In all the cases where theory is encountering serious difficulties, the trouble arises because of the Procrustean attempts to fit all physical processes into the limited three-dimensional spatial frame. The reciprocal system shows that there is a conjugate sector of the universe, the inverse sector, which can only be represented in the analogous three-dimensional temporal reference frame. Most of the mysterious astronomical phenomena that have no proper explanation in the conventional theory turn out to be the normal inverse sector phenomena as they appear to us. High energy cosmic rays, cosmic microwave background radiation, and gamma ray bursts are typical examples. We also find that some of the inverse sector processes have wider implications and are relevant to the life sciences. All the bizarre aspects of quantum phenomena follow logically from the discrete nature of space and time. Further, the system of theory based on the universal motion offers a rational and understandable picture of the reality underlying the quantum phenomena, which the quantum theory fails to provide. Okay, that is the end of this paper. And again, you might want to go over this in slow motion, go over it a few times, to get what he's saying. But he is fleshing out some of the important points about the reciprocal system, how it leads to life phenomena and quantum phenomena. You just have to understand the rules and how they differ in the various sectors. And once you kind of grasp the lay of the land there, you can make better sense of how it's going. So you have the material sector and you have the cosmic sector, and within the material sector you have the time region, and within the cosmic sector you have the space region. You have basically three boundaries. You have the unit space boundary, you have the unit speed boundary, and you have the unit time boundary. And the rules invert each time you cross a boundary, meaning that you have to interchange the roles of space and time. and there's a few other caveats that you have to understand, but those are the basic gist. You have to understand those caveats just to be able to make like real accurate measurements or accurate predictions of the measurements. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Tomorrow, I think we might be getting into another one of Nehru's paper on, it's on linguistics, language, experience, and delusion. And I think that paper will show a little bit about the power of the reciprocal system, how it can move into all kinds of every subject. And so this will give us a chance to, go into the liberal arts and see how Larson's theory can penetrate there as well. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Have a great